So nice to meet you, Rob.
Yeah,
Um,
good to meet you, Georgie.
and thank you so much for offering to share your story because I know you've just said that you found other people's success stories really inspiring for you and giving you hope. So
Yeah,
you're keen
thanks
to
for having me.
use
Yeah,
your yeah, great. So okay, so where did this all begin for you then, Rob?
well, there was a long history of intolerances and back pain and kind of psychosomatic digestive problems, but it really, to keep it brief, it really got worse um, around about February 2019 when I went to see an osteo
Hmm.
because I'd had severe back pain for about 6 weeks, but
Right.
just wasn't getting better. So I figured I'd have to see someone. I went to see the osteo, and uh, ultimately it got around to it being five doctors, an osteo, and an acupuncturist all thought I had autoimmune disease.
Right.
So whether it was Crohn's, ankylosing spondylitis, or celiac, opinions varied.
Hmm.
But there was never an official diagnosis by a specialist. The one functional
Did
medicine
you?
doctor.
Sorry, did you actually see any specialists as part of
Yeah, I saw a gastro.
just?
But he wanted to do a gastroscopy, but that got cancelled because of lockdown. And then basically by the time it was offered again months later, I wasn't particularly interested. I mean, I just noticed the pattern of every time I saw a doctor, I kind of took a nosedive. There's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy effect of, oh yes, we're all very concerned. We think it's, one of these incurable diseases. And I just figured I'd kind of rather do it on my own.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah, that's not necessarily something that anyone should replicate. If you've got symptoms, you should see a doctor.
But at least you'd seen a number of doctors and
Oh
basically.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're all kind of unanimous that it was pretty dire.
Yeah. So you
And
mentioned when you first emailed me
yeah,
that one of the doctors said you'd had the worst
yeah,
autoimmune.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, the
Yeah.
worst autoimmune patient he'd ever seen. Because at
How
that point, yeah, at that point, it was severe hip and back pain, chronic. And I've got a symptoms list here. I had to write it down. There's so many. Um, and I was reacting so badly to practically all food and drink that I could only eat 1,000 calories a day of mushrooms, almond milk, and cucumbers, and that went on for 4 months. And then
so
eventually, when I
lost loads
started,
of weight.
pardon?
Presumably you lost loads of weight with that.
Oh yeah, yeah, I looked like a prisoner of war.
Oh dear.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was really bad. There was a risk of dying um, for that kind of 4 month period.
Mm,
And eventually, the functional medicine doctor put me on hydrochloric acid. When I got over the fear of burning my esophagus
yeah.
and finally took some, that gave me more appetite. So I was able to get up to about 1,500 calories, including some organic beef.
So was it just down to appetite, or was it that you were reacting to so many foods as well?
It was appetite and reacting to various things. I mean, I went down the autoimmune paleo diet route because they were the only ones who held out hope for recovery or,
Yeah.
well, reversal of symptoms, let's say. And the mainstream, the doctors, the mainstream medical approach is that these diseases are incurable.
Mm,
So I figured I'll go with it. And I couldn't stand the prospect of being disabled. And they also say it's progressive. So it's just already going to get worse. And I was already terrible. So I
yeah.
couldn't stand the prospect of remaining disabled and continually getting worse
Yeah.
when I was already in an absolutely terrible position.
Absolutely.
So I kind of went down the diet route
Mhm.
because there was more hope there, and I had to believe that I could recover.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, that led to some shenanigans. Um, yeah, it led to an unhealthy obsession with food.
Hmm.
Um, because I did get some. It was very misleading because I got some placebo relief from
Right.
dropping like lactose and gluten and starch.
Hmm.
Each time I'd get a boost, but it was only temporary, like many placebos are, as you know. And yeah, and ultimately it got to this terrible point where I was barely eating anything.
Right. So When was the first time? I mean, you say you started many years before. How old were you when you first started noticing problems with food? So,
Problems with food. Well, I probably when I was about 8 or something with
right.
citrus. I get, digestive problems with citrus.
Yeah.
But that was minor. I mean, just don't eat oranges. So that wasn't, it didn't become a really major issue until about 2019.
Right.
But yeah, I thought I was lactose intolerant, and therefore I suppose I was. Uh, and I had to start dropping all the dairy about 2015.
Mhm.
And then,
And did
yeah,
you
then I
feel
got to
better?
29.
Did you feel
Pardon?
better for dropping the dairy?
Oh yeah, much better. Yeah, that's what convinced me. It's this
Right.
temporary placebo effect that kind of suckered me into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what happened then when you were at the bottom? It felt like you're at the bottom.
Rock bottom. I finally, everyone kept urging me to see a doctor, so I finally caved to the pressure. I didn't particularly want to, but I decided I better add. I went to see my GP, and he wanted to do a celiac test,
Hmm.
but that involves eating gluten. And at that point, that would have put me in hospital,
Right.
maybe. It would
Right.
certainly have been a severe setback. I mean,
Yeah.
it happened hundreds of times before. I eat a bit of bread, and I've just got terrible crippling pain, diarrhea, and everything.
Right.
So I figured, well, okay, what if I get diagnosed with celiac, and whether I get diagnosed or not, the outcome's the same. I'm going to avoid gluten
Yeah.
because within that paradigm, it would just always have triggered a reaction.
Hmm. Okay.
The other thing, he also was obsessed with Gilbert's because I had slightly abnormal bilirubin count.
Right.
I'm thinking, what's the point? Why are you talking about Gilbert's? It's just
Do you want
mild
to explain
jaundice.
that? Do you want to explain that?
Oh, Gilbert's syndrome is I don't know. I think it's a benign liver condition,
Mhm.
which just means you got mild jaundice and slightly elevated bilirubin count, slightly abnormal bilirubin. So basically, it would not explain even half my symptoms. So I figured, what's the point going down this road? And even my doctor had to agree with the logic of that one. And then where do we get to next? Yeah, and he did refer me to a gastroenterologist, and then he wanted to do the gastroscopy, but that eventually got cancelled. I
Yeah.
had an ultrasound as well, and for that appointment, I had to go in a wheelchair because it was down so many corridors of the hospital,
Right.
and I couldn't walk more than 200 feet at that point.
Right.
So that was demoralizing.
So presumably the impact on your life is that your life just really shrank even before
Oh
the.
yeah, yeah. I know. I didn't leave the house for 10 months.
Wow.
Yeah,
And that was because of the reaction to all the food and other
reaction to the
symptoms
food.
probably had to do with
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and the disabling pain that was constant in uh, hips and backs, hips and back, and there's a whole massive symptoms list
Mm.
here. Can I read it out?
Yeah. Yeah. Go on.
It won't take 5 minutes, but
Well, don't take 5 minutes.
gingivitis, yeah, gingivitis, wisdom tooth related infections, chronic back and hip pain, gluten, starch, citrus, egg, dairy intolerance, cold intolerance, like carpal tunnel, repetitive strain injury, hand and wrist pain type symptoms, urinary pain, anal fissure and anal fissure pain, your diarrhea, constipation, IBS type symptoms, which I associated with the food, tooth pain, chronic fatigue, which have been going on at that point for about 10, 11 years.
Right.
Um, Chest pain, which is pretty alarming, but when I went in for EKGs, it was always the heart and everything completely normal. Neck pain, and basically, I found that everything was TMS,
Yeah. So
but it was
basically,
all psychosomatic anyway, and it all went away using the TMS
fantastic.
treatments.
Fantastic. So it sounds like that, although you say the situation got a lot worse in 2019, you were just saying that you've had many of those symptoms and it affected your
Yeah,
life for about 10 years.
yeah, really. That was just for the kind of narrative convenience, because if I told the whole story, we'd be going for hours. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, that's fine. Well, you sounds like, as you said, you're writing a book about it anyway.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. If
I'm
you want the
sure.
full story, that'll be coming shortly.
Okay, so how did you come across TMS then?
Right, yeah. So I I got recommended Sarno's book on the Amazon algorithm, and I bought it because I figured, it's 160 pages. This is relatively easy compared to the autoimmune diet books that I've been reading, that I've been
Mm.
slogging through. So at that point, I was completely desperate, willing to try anything.
And presumably, if buying his book, you were focusing it more on back pain than anything else.
Yeah, I didn't read it for 2 months because I thought, well, this guy's talking about back pain. I've got autoimmune.
Right.
And the other thing was I couldn't accept that the pain was completely psychogenic.
Mm.
So it kind of sat on my nightstand for about 2 months. And but I had a dream that really convinced me.
Yeah.
And I dreamt that I was on a podcast holding up Sarno's book and saying, diet is okay, but this is better, this TMS
Wow.
approach.
Yeah.
And so that kind of convinced me, along with some other things. I was reading some Jung at the time, kept talking about patients with hysteria and psychosomatic dyspepsia, he called it in the oldie timey nomenclature, and how that was resolved using psychotherapy. So I started thinking, maybe this dream was actually literally trying to tell me something.
Mm.
I'd also been dreaming about eating bread rolls with chocolate spread again and again and again the whole time. And I was thinking,
Wow.
is this just my subconscious taunting me? Or just like, as Freud would say, wish fulfillment. I just
Yes.
want
Yeah.
to eat bread, but I can't. But it turns out it was actually informing me of a real possibility.
You could
Yeah,
say
really literal and useful dreams.
yeah.
And so yeah, I started reading Sarno, and when I began to apply it to my own case, um, thinking about repressed emotions and memories, I got about 20% improvement just from thinking about that.
Right.
Then I went for a walk, and I walked 3.5 miles faster and further with more hills than anything I'd done since got really ill. And from that moment on, I was convinced this was the approach. This was it.
Fantastic.
Um, yeah. From then on, it was kind of gradual improvement, very slow.
Mhm.
And I would occasionally just have to ambush myself without talking about what I was planning beforehand, because I find the unconscious is always listening.
Yeah.
And if I was, it's a bit like the whole idea of jinxing something.
Yeah.
If I said that I'm planning to eat cheese, in a week or something, and I tried it, I'd get a bit of a reaction. So I just learned to keep my mouth shut and just do it instead, basically.
Yeah. So
And but very gradually, baby steps.
expectation effect. If we, predicted coding, if your brain, you expect to eat something that's going to cause a reaction in your body, then it
Yeah,
will.
yeah,
But
yeah,
once you start working on
absolutely.
those beliefs and unlearning those neural circuits, then that makes it a lot easier. And it
Yeah,
starts to
yeah,
retrain that in the brain. So
yeah. It was.
when you were reading Sarno's book, and I know you read more about this work as well, when you were reading this, were you easily able to understand how this fitted with you and what the causes for you? I mean, did you consider childhood? Because obviously, starting from the age of 8, I presume that there was some sort of stressors around childhood. Was it
Yeah.
personality? Was what areas do you feel were most
Oh,
relevant?
kind of all the above. Yeah. But I knew that well, the main unconscious cause was grief for my father's death from motor neuron disease.
Oh gosh,
That was the main one.
hmm. And how old were
But
you then,
the
out of interest?
pardon?
How old were you then, out of interest?
What was that? 19, almost 20 when he
Right,
died. But he'd been ill for about 3 years before.
long-term illness from that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about motor neuron, and I'm beginning to wonder if it's, this is, can't prove any of this, of course, just a question. I began to ask myself, is motor neuron disease TMS through the motor nerves instead of the sensory pain nerves?
Mm.
Could it have unconscious causation? Because nothing showed up on my dad's test. I mean, no physical thing, like no clear blood abnormalities or anything like that.
Right, yeah.
And that would be consistent with unconscious causation because it's invisible.
Absolutely. Well,
That's just a
certainly probably
question.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question, probably not the right place to discuss it now, but it's we know that there are so many different factors in anybody's conditions, that we always need to look at the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual,
Yeah.
really whole person approach. So I think it's a very interesting question. But, okay,
Okay.
so that obviously would be having an effect.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. But the hardest part for me reading Sano was trying to make the leap from what I thought I had anyway, autoimmune. Like I never got a specialist diagnosis, so we can't say for sure. I personally think I probably had at least one autoimmune disease,
Right.
probably two. And I did have a very detailed stool test report that showed I had high inflammation, high zonulin, which I was going off this leaky gut theory, and that's about gut permeability.
Yeah.
And they reckon people with autoimmune paleo people think that if you've got high zonulin, it means you've got leaky gut, and that's
Right.
supposedly in their idea the cause of autoimmune disease.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah,
We know
yeah,
that from the research that past trauma has an impact, is relevant. More people, if people have had
yeah,
past trauma, they're more likely to develop autoimmune conditions as well as chronic pain and cancer and other things. So that will
yeah,
always be playing a part, whatever the condition. It's always worth
yeah.
considering.
Well, yeah, I think that the unconscious causation was kind of at the deepest level, and then below the physical mechanism of how it manifested in the body was the inflammation, the pain.
And stress causes inflammation. So,
Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
always
absolutely.
working with things like this. It's always looking at the predisposition of TMS, mind body conditions to start. Sort of that's the past trauma, our experiences as a child, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Our personality, behaviors, and then obviously the precipitating, the triggering factors of why symptoms start and then why they persist. So we need to consider all those when we're working with TMS.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, when I was beginning to recover, I got what Sana would call symptom imperative. Like my foot swelled up massively, like 1.5 times. Well, I don't know, it's just a massive amount of swelling. It could have been edema, maybe.
Right.
And it was very alarming and clearly not an invisible type thing like the pain that I've been having. Um, and that was when the journaling really came in, and your book really helped me nail down the journaling,
Good.
particularly the whole idea of just turning the filter off completely. Yeah, that really helped. And
Rewrite. Yeah.
yeah, and within 10 minutes of journaling, I the foot just deflated completely from being about one of that 50% more swollen than it usually is, all the way up the ankle and the calf to just normal.
Isn't that interesting? And what a
Yeah.
powerful experiential experience for you.
Oh
To
yeah, it's very convincing that this whole
yes,
thing is really the way to go.
yeah,
Yeah,
really giving you hope and with
yeah,
moving forward. Fantastic.
yeah. Well, after that, I did journaling regularly. It was about at least 40 minutes a day, just before I went to sleep at night, because I figured, maybe I'd have a bit of I'd be more suggestible in a semi-conscious state, be able to access the unconscious more directly.
Right.
But I think it works whenever you do it, basically, for TMS type stuff.
The only issue about doing it at night is if you're going to be doing sort of stuff about trauma, journaling about trauma, unless you really manage to rationalize it, put it in
Yeah.
perspective, look at what you've learned from it, then quite often people will find that they have challenging dreams or they wake up in the night and it's all going around their head. So
Oh
that's
yeah, well, I get loads of nightmares. I mean, that's kind of normal to me. They don't really phase me that much because I have these vivid dreams, and about 2/3 of them are nightmares practically every night. So
right. That's interesting.
I
Have you
just ignore
explored
it.
that through journaling? Like in the morning,
Oh
waking up.
yeah, I analyze all of them as best I can, and I found Jung's book on dreams to be really useful in that
Right.
regard. And I do think that this dream analysis is not something I've seen a lot of in the TMS literature. I think it could be helpful to kind of help to really find the unconscious cause of the symptoms.
It can, and at times it can if when people
Yeah.
analyze them. And one of the things that can be helpful as well is nighttime programming. So before going to bed, to pose a question.
Yeah.
Like, so what's the underlying cause of this or whatever? And if you say that a
Yeah.
few times before going to
Yeah.
sleep, seeing that actually has some remarkable results.
Yeah.
Either
Well, yeah.
morning when things have shifted.
Yeah. But the whole time I was ill before I found Sano and your work and many others. I mean, I read practically all the TMS stuff because I found that it helped me.
Yeah,
It actually just reading the books diminished the symptoms. So
yeah.
it's like, I'm not that much of a doer, but I certainly am a reader.
All right.
If reading is going to get me out of this hole, I can read, you know. So I read a
Do you
lot.
find helpful apart from the journaling?
Pardon?
What else did you find helpful apart from the reading and the journaling?
Apart from reading and journaling, well, I'd call it a kind of pincer movement. In that, on the one hand, I would dig deeper into the unconscious through the journaling, and then on the other, and that would give me more willpower to kind of bat aside or ignore the a kind of mindfulness type strategy to ignore the fear and the worries and the pain.
Yeah,
So, on the one hand, you just keep going deeper into the unconscious, and on the other hand, you improve your capacity to just completely dismiss worries,
right.
and that in turn will diminish the pain.
So did you gradually start to do more or eat more? How did you do that?
Yeah, I built up very gradually. I started with well, just eating more beef initially, and I was on these HCL pills, so I had to gradually wean myself off them.
Right.
And even that took me 6 months. So I can imagine how hard it would be for anyone to wean themselves off a proper prescription med.
Yeah.
Even that took 6 months, and yeah, I took it very slow because I didn't want to be discouraged
Mm.
and by some
Sometimes
terrible
people have
reaction.
setbacks. People have setbacks if they reduce it too quickly, and then the
Yeah,
fear triggers a reaction as much as anything else.
yeah,
And that can then, like you say, set people back. So
yeah. I wanted to avoid that.
is really up their journey, and it can
Hmm.
be take as long as you feel you need it to take, basically.
Yeah, it was about 15 months in total for me.
Mm.
Um, but people with less severe problems could do it much shorter time frames.
Well, everybody's different.
I mean, I don't want that to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah,
Right. So the severity of the symptoms is actually less important, or how long you've had them is less important than maybe what's happened to you, as well as your personality, that how much hope you
yeah,
have. There's all sorts of factors that bear part in this, not
yeah,
just the severity of symptoms. It's
yeah, of
interesting.
course, yeah,
And again, obviously, we don't have to put it into our heads that belief that, oh, it's going to take me however long, because that can put a block on or can make it take longer than it needs to be.
yeah, yeah. I have quite some bad experiences with self-fulfilling prophecies.
All right.
Yeah, all these provisional diagnoses and what have you, and of course, it wasn't definitive. I mean, I ultimately is my fault for really believing I had this condition and going down the diet approach, which led to all sorts of
I don't think
um,
it's a matter,
starvation.
I don't think it's a matter of blame at all. It's things you're being told, things you felt that
Yeah,
you had to do. You did what you did, felt was best at the time. So,
yeah, yeah. It
how's
is
life,
understandable if the
sorry,
diet
how's
approach is.
life changed now for you?
Pardon?
How has life changed now for you?
Oh, completely different. I mean, I go running, I lift weights, I go on 18-mile hikes. Totally different. And my like I said, my work productivity as a writer has improved massively.
Um,
I mean, the last 6.5 months, I've started and finished and published 2 novels, and I've got another two that are like rough drafts.
wow.
So it helps not just with pain, illness, but also with work productivity, I would say.
So is this your work rather than hobby, the
Oh
writing?
no, yeah, this is what I do all the time because I
Fabulous.
mean, yeah, I learned at university when I was working really hard on a degree that I hated. That I don't think there's any point doing something that I don't like to do, really. I think it's bad for me in particular with my psychosomatic tendencies. So I just do what I want to do.
That sounds great, and it sounds like your world has opened up.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Seeing more people, eating what you like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Fabulous.
been a total life changer.
Hmm. So, if you wanted to give viewers a couple of suggestions or things, big things for that were helpful for you, what would you suggest? Maybe some.
Well, yeah, if you've accepted the TMS diagnosis, or a kind of think it probably is, the next thing, the hardest part is probably figuring out exactly what in the unconscious is causing the symptoms of pain. And for me, I developed a trial and error approach based on writing out a list of common life events, selecting the ones that were applicable to my case, and basically writing in as much detail as possible any memories of that life event. And then if I got pain relief from doing that, I would double down on that life event and go deeper into it. And
Right.
if I didn't get pain relief, I would kind of leave that and put it on the shelf. So it's a kind of trial and error approach that doesn't really require much intuition or understanding of the unconscious, which is very difficult to understand because it's invisible.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really worked for me.
Good. Good. Oh, that's
Uh,
fantastic. Sorry, go
yeah,
on.
I've got a few other tips, but basically the whole idea of ambushing yourself when you've got to try and make a breakthrough, and just not talking about it beforehand and simply doing it with zero warning, preferably on a day when you're in a good mood and have slept well the night before.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
That's what I encourage clients to do, but I don't call it ambushing.
all right.
Rather than going into the head, going into the negative stuff, is like you say, if you're feeling strong and resilient and in a good mood that day, and you've had a thought about, now at some point I really want to eat that or do something, that's the time to do it before you talk to
Yeah,
someone.
absolutely. Yeah. And the other tip I would say is really that one thing that can help is to make a kind of promise to yourself or a loved one, or a deity even, to do something good, even if it's merely telling your success story.
Mhm.
If you recover, as a kind of,
Yeah.
just call it an anti-Faustian pact,
Right.
kind of bargain.
Yeah.
Um, because that really helps you to tap into willpower, I
Mm.
find.
And a reason
Um,
behind it rather than just being the reason being you.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if beginning to go beyond self-interested desires like that, it really does open up a lot of possibilities with willpower, and that can get things moving
Right.
in a big way.
Yeah. Because it's not just about you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And where there's a will, there's a way. And, for me, the way presented itself, and it was Sano.
Mm. And when you
And
were ready for it. Yeah.
I attribute that to the kind of ultimately making the decision that I was going to get better, and just deciding to believe that I would.
Yes. Yeah. And then
That
just
I
following the
believe
path.
that came. Sorry.
And then following the path rather than trying to figure it all out before
Yeah.
starting.
Yeah. I believe, I think the belief came first, and then afterwards, the precise means for recovery, Sano and your work and everyone else's, kind of just was landed upon.
Yeah, yeah. It was meant to be. Well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely think
congratulations on your recovery, and have you put the link to your book when you've written your own story? We can add that certainly to the page where this will be. But
okay,
congratulations
good.
on your own recovery and all the stuff I'm sure you're going to be doing moving forward that this has enabled you to do.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.